Justice Moseneke, welcome. Very good to have you with us on Kai FM 95.9.
Thank you, John Perlman. Thank you for having me.
The title of your book is My Own Liberator, and yet in reading it, you write about a life in which a veritable army of people have shaped you, from teachers to grandparents to parents to neighbors to other lawyers to fellow prisoners on Robben Island. Tell us why you chose the title and what you're trying to say with it.
Well, John, the title is meant to convey something very central, something I'm very passionate about, which really is this. In every life, there's space for personal agency, things that you must and have to do in order to be able to optimize and maximize your potential. And that happens always within the context of a collective agency, where many other people around you, where the village I came from, for instance, Atteridgeville, would be everything, would be the crucible. But within that crucible, you need each one of us being aware of the fact that we are the genesis of any change. And if we were to remain oppressed or slaves, there is role and room for us as individuals to seek to change that. And so it is very intended and targeted to our young people to say we have room for collective struggle, but within it, we need solid individuals who assume full responsibility in trying to change their world and the villages which brought them up and the nation with which they find themselves.
Your book has this quote. You talk about your time on Robben Island. First, you cannot merely dream about your revolutionary ideals. You have to take real and concrete steps to pursue legitimate goals. The second lesson was that I was my own liberator. The phrase is copied from the inimitable revolutionary thinkers Anton Muziwake Lembede and Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, who urged young people like me to pursue freedom in our lifetime. Was that just a political thing, or was it a spiritual thing as well?
Well, John, a bit of both here. Politically, think about it carefully. You grow up, as I did, in Atteridgeville, or it could be Soweto, it could be Sophia Town, it could be Nobuhle or Kwazakele. And as you grow up, you are confronted by an unjust system that deserves nothing less than being destroyed. Once you come to that realization, then the question must be, what are you going to do? It's fine to be born a slave, but should you actually die a slave? And that is an invitation to action. To be born poor, hopefully you don't want to die poor. If you have no access to education, hopefully you want to die having had access to education. So in that sense, we are central to the kind of world that we actually ultimately going to live with. So for me, when I grew up, it was Inkululeko ngexesha lethu, which was a clarion call to say, hey, do you want freedom in your own lifetime? And the answer for me was yes. And I was lucky enough that freedom to some degree came along in my own lifetime.
I want to talk to you about teachers, because right at the front of the book, I think your second paragraph, there's a dedication to a long list of teachers. And indeed, you throughout the book refer to teachers, including one of your headmasters, Mr. Makudu Ramopo, who echoes what you're just saying now to some degree, was in the habit of bellowing at morning school assembly. And I quote him, "You have no business to be lazy when you are poor and oppressed. Your foremost task is to change your condition." Given how much influence teachers have had on you, what are your feelings now about the state of education in South Africa, both at the tertiary and at the lower levels?
It hurts, John. Teachers form us. They point and light up the way for us. Teachers do much more than impart just formal education. They impart values. They impart the way that we will live our lives. And And somehow I had to pay tribute to them. And I want the young people of today to be able to find teachers to whom they can pay tribute, because it's all so central. When one hits sort of difficult moments in one's life, like you're 15 and have to go to jail, you've got to draw from some inner strength. And it's really those lessons that say, you are an eagle, take off and fly. You have to liberate yourself. Alone or in collaboration with others, you are human. You're fully grown human, entitled to worth. So the teachers were out there, and the basic values, John, of hard work. Just being true to the task, waking up every morning, doing your assignments, doing your task, trying to produce outcomes, and also trying to liberate yourself.
Do you think that some of the passion from which you derived so much benefit as a young man of teachers was in part because the way they taught and the extent to which they tried to stretch out of the curriculum and into some genuine learning was an act of resistance? And because the context has changed, teachers nowadays may well see their jobs differently and less of a calling, more of a job.
I agree the context is different, and you make a good point. I don't agree that the task is any less.
Yes.
I think teachers must continue to say to our children, you actually can build a big part of the city. You can create a center if you have to.
Yes.
But you can be one of the greatest paleontologists that the world has ever seen. As we know, Vis produced one. You can be the best researcher ever. So what I'm really saying, those teachers have to go out there fired up. Not only now, but all times. And you can see what parents do. If they think teachers are fired up, you see the children moving gradually towards private schools or good schools, and leaving schools where the teachers are doing less than a good job. So one of our biggest challenges as a nation is to restore the place of teachers. And I know what that has done for me. Good teachers under Bantu education, and they went way beyond the restricted syllabus, which was intended to produce slaves and oppressed people.
Yes. 086 0000 959. My guest tonight is Justice Dikgang Moseneke. He's written the first part, I think, of his memoirs, My Own Liberator, a memoir. I believe that there's another book to come about time spent in the Constitutional Court. We will wait for that while we talk about this book. But please give us a call. You may have some questions, some things you want to share with with Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke. Give us a call, 086 0000 959. What are the other things that obviously shaped you as family? And you write about a fascinating difference between your paternal line, well-educated. You say most of my father's nieces and nephews turned out very well. They had the fortune of good education, acquired skills, and entered professions. And then you write with great love, I have to say, and perhaps some of your strongest prose is about your maternal grandparents, and in particular your grandfather, Makubande Dixon Makaza. And you say of him, his rustic illiteracy and innumeracy yielded to his raw will to carve out a better life for himself and his family. His lack of formal learning gave way to his native intelligence. Were you trying to say something more than just about your own family, but about forces that have shaped the country as well? That we've been built not just by the educated, but by a wisdom derived from other sources?
Spot on, John. Thank you and for that insight. Indeed, it is so. We are a product of effort that comes from a variety of sources. But where there's hard work, there's honesty, and there's an understanding for moving on away from our depressed past, then you find somebody like my grandfather. Never been to school, came from Zululand and came out to Pretoria, now Tshwane, and he rises from that illiteracy to become the chief chef in a major hotel in Pretoria of the time.
Yes.
you must wonder, how did he read the recipes? How did he come to terms with all those, drills in a modern kitchen to become a gourmet chef? He does it. And up to his death, he was still illiterate. If you remember, I tell the story of him. Every time he took a newspaper, he would look at the pictures first, and they would guide him how to hold it, as if he was reading and was literate when he was not. So, yes, he was awesome, and I think many of our people find themselves in that position.
Monga is calling us on 086 0000 959. That's the number you can use if you'd like to join in our conversation with former Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke. Monga, welcome and thanks for giving us your time. Hi.
Thank you so much. I just want to appreciate and thank the.
Okay, Monga, can you just turn your radio off? We're just getting some feedback there.
But off now.
Yes, much better. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was saying to you, I just want to thank Dr. Moseneke and say thank you so much. My daughter is a product of his foundation. She's a lawyer today and passed with cum laude, and I'm very grateful to him. But I also want to appreciate the fact that how he acknowledges teachers. I'm a product of a mother who was a teacher. And up to today, when people see me, they still say, "Wana mistress mama." And that's how people remember teachers and the knowledge they have imparted to us as children. And I think we always hold that knowledge from Okobo Senate 1, Senate 2, where Mistress Mang used to do this. So it is important to understand the work and the difficult situations that they are in as teachers, and I really appreciate that.
Monga, thanks. Calling on 086 0000 959. Let's talk a little bit about the politics that was such a huge part of your history. Arrested, charged, and on your way to Robben Island at the age of 15. As difficult and as traumatic as that must have been, do you think that when you considered perhaps the circumstances of the older men around you, that in some ways you had the advantage of being younger and knowing that you hadn't left behind children, not knowing their fate, perhaps a wife, perhaps a parent who was dependent on you rather than the other way around? Was that any part of your experience on the island, which you certainly make clear was terrible in so many ways, but did youth perhaps help you in some way there?
Oh, I was lucky. Yeah. I say it in the book over and over again about my good fortune. You're 15, just about to 10, sweet 16. You have no woes of the world. You don't have a regular girlfriend. Boys are late bloomers. So you don't, you have no child, and you basically was growing up to try and pass JC. If you remember, John, those days, junior certificate, which has since disappeared to somewhere. And that is what was my concern. And of course, being a prisoner, then having 10 years to live. When I looked around, the elderly comrades who had children at school, who had lost their jobs, who had no income now that they were prisoners, and who had much greater challenges psychologically. So yes, in a strange way, the youthfulness that I had became a massive advantage, and which really meant I would be ready to engage with, for instance, new education, both formal and informal. So, and lastly, of course, something that the apartheid regime never worked out. They took all of us and put us in the same place.
Yes.
So suddenly you have an Ahmed Kathrada here, and then you have a Harry Gwala here, then you have Zef Mutuping here, Jeff Masamula here, you have Sadiq Isaacs here, you have, Mac Maharaj. So suddenly you are a young fellow, and you're sitting in the middle of these people who have dedicated themselves to achieve a transformed, caring, and fair society. That must rub off on you. It must do something for your upbringing. So somehow, Robben Island suddenly became a haven of development. And I must say, an uninterrupted haven of development. Because suddenly you have 5 hours a day to study and to listen to lived experiences, which are ever so important, sometimes more important than formal education.
086 00 959. Our guest is former Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke. His book is just out. It's called My Own Liberator. He's with us until 6. Call and ask some questions, share some comments, share some experiences. We'd love to hear from you. Also send us a text, 36959. Those cost R1.50. I see George is trying to get through from Dobsonville, but first from Mondio, Thabang. Good evening to you, Thabang.
Good evening. Good evening, Tate Moseneke.
Thabang Dumela, good evening.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you about, I just noticed a pattern in your career where you were, I think you were the deputy president of the PAC.
Yes.
And then you moved on to be the deputy chairperson of the IEC.
Yes.
And then through an incident that we all well know, you ended up as the Deputy Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court and not making it past that. Would you like to comment on that? Are you condemned to be a deputy?
Well, Thabang, that's a nice note. Yes, I have been a deputy for longer than I want to be. But here's the moral of the story, Thabang. When you are a deputy, you've got to shine so much, do so much, as to render the title secondary and let, your commitment to the course and what you do to come through. So the story, particularly for young people, is titles are nice, but they don't quite tell you what your real contribution is, isn't it? It would have been nice to be a number one in each of those cases, but I don't think you really diminish the contribution.
I know your book on your time at the Constitutional Court is still to come out, but you do write fairly briefly about it in this one. Would it be fair to say, Justice, that you expressed some sadness that you felt that what may have disqualified you from the Chief Justice position of our Constitutional Court now was an unfair distortion of something you said in a private setting? I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so over to you.
Yes, actually, what I said is a personal credo. It's something so important. And I write about it in the book again. Mm-hmm. Here it is. It is not what the political elite want. It is what is good for the people. And that's the cardinal message that must stay, I think, with every citizen of this land and with every young person of this land. Now, if you get disqualified by a message that fundamental, I think that's just fine, huh? It is totally fine. It's worth the while. Because essentially, think about it. If you are a judge, where should your allegiance be? To the law and the people and the Constitution. It can never be to the political elite or the economic elite or even the cultural elite. It must be within the context of the best interests of the people of the country.
Do you think because ours is a country where we fought such fierce and bitter and for many, many people debilitating political battles, that we look to reduce people to a political label? You're aligned with this person, you tied up with that party, and that the perception around the words that you uttered at that time were then filed into a box marked Dikgang Moseneke, ex-PAC, Africanist, therefore aligned to Thabo Mbeki, etc., and a whole lot of things that had, in many ways, at best, partial relevance to who you were.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure that's what happened. And many people thought, if you don't support me, who the hell are you supporting?
Yes.
I'm sure that it would have had that kind of impression to others. But I would hope, and I spent time in the book to write about the need for young people to free themselves and typify themselves as being agents of a much larger social good, much larger change and movement towards a better and transformed society. So, and they should not confine themselves to narrow political sort of allegiances, because the task requires breadth of vision and of effort.
I want to spend some time with you, Justice, and talk to you about the law, because you talk of a deep love of the law from quite early on in the book. And it's intriguing for me, given that you grew up in a society in which the law was so much and so oppressively the enemy. It was used to codify and enforce and deepen this inequality that you felt so bitterly opposed to. How did you see in it a tool for something better? What was it about the law that grabbed you? Because you could have done other things.
Yes, well, two ways. The first was a space for activism. If you look at our leaders, most of them have always used the law to advance quite crucial activism. Think about people like A.P. Mda, think about Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Robert Sobukwe, Godfrey Piche, just about most of our activists, and you can go on and extend it to Arthur Chaskelson, George Bezos. You can go to a whole Albie Sachs, a whole many examples of people who understood that the law is a social tool, is an instrument to produce outcomes, is not something that floats above us, irrelevant and unconnected to the kind of outcomes that we want for our democracy and the social change and fairness that we hope for. So apartheid used the law to repress.
Yes.
And we have been, and in my career I've been, trying to produce a jurisprudence together with my colleagues that seeks to achieve the goals of our Constitution. So yes, the law is an instrument, is a social tool in order to be able to produce just outcomes and fair outcomes. And therefore it lends itself to activists to want to change their world.
Speaking of the law, Tabo's calling from Randburg. Tabo, my producer, tells me he's an advocate and wants to, well, over to you, Tabo. You tell us. Good evening.
Good evening, and how are you, sir?
Fine, and you?
I'm fine, thank you. I just wanted to pose a question to the Chief Justice.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Good evening, Tabo.
Good evening, Chief Justice. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you, Tabo?
I'm fine, thank you. Chief Justice, I'm an advocate. I've been practicing in Pretoria for 13 years now.
Good for you.
The question that I wanted to pose is in relation to the briefing patterns of the state attorney. Like, I was disturbed at some stage when I was told that as long as you are not a member of the Pretoria Bar, you are not entitled to be briefed by the state attorney. After all these years that we've been in our democratic dispensation, that to me it came as a shock to say, then is it discrimination on the basis of association, or what is it? Even though one has served tutelage, I think I served my tutelage in 2003. But even today, after all this experience, I'm still being told that you cannot be, in a sense that you are not entitled for as long as you are not a member of Pretoria Bar.
Tabo, thanks for the question, and perhaps if you could broaden it as well, Justice Moseneke, because in your book you do talk to some degree, and I think you might even use the term feudal. It certainly sounds feudal, some of the structures in the law. First to Tabo's question, but then more broadly, do you think we've done enough to remove that aspect of the law, never mind the laws themselves? But your thoughts?
No, the answer is no. Remember that we inherited the dual system of advocates and attorneys from the British system, because advocates were meant to serve the nobility, and solicitors were to make contact with everyday people. And there was a social distance between the two. So we have to do more, and a lot has been done in appointing people from both attorneys and the ranks of advocates. In other words, that elitism in many ways has been eroded, but it still remains and it is there. And Tabo, it is sad. I think actually opportunities must be opened wide and far, and that the fact that advocates come together and in association voluntarily should not exclude anybody from having the entitlement to do work, particularly if it emanates from the state and is funded by the public purse. There should be a much more just distribution. And I've written a lot about transformation and briefing patterns on behalf, in order to push on the system to be different from what it is now.
We've got some calls and I'll get to them in a moment. Malesetsane, Selby, Freddie, all calling in. But just staying on the theme of the law in case we end up moving on, Justice, your thoughts on this topic. We talk about the law quite a lot on this show, and one of the big issues is what would it take for South Africans to start believing that the law can possibly be fair? As you can imagine, we had burning conversation around the Oscar Pistorius trial, around the extent to which money might buy you access to the law in certain ways. Race in the law is a big issue. And I wonder what your view is on our democracy 22 years in, and the extent to which the law has gone some distance to establishing itself as a credible force for A, justice, and B, for good.
Well, the challenges remain, and they are big. We've done a lot to move away from the apartheid style of law. For instance, we have installed the Supreme Constitution, which you use as a yardstick to test the correctness and the fairness of any other law or conduct. And we have produced a jurisprudence that is very progressive and recognized like that around the world. But that doesn't answer the question you pose.
Yes.
Which is, would an everyday citizen get justice all the time, which they are entitled to all the time? And the answer would be not always. And indeed, the class structures in society tends to translate themselves into privilege and the lack of it. So to the extent that race, class, and gender and other distinctions still produce inequality, you can be sure that access to justice will reflect that inequality, and sadly so. So that is why we've got to chase down the route of liberating society, creating young people who are their own liberators, and societies who protect and defend their freedom and equalize society so that access in substance should be equal.
086 0000 959. Malesetsane, somewhere out on the road, calling. Good evening to you.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Oh, Doctor, I'm very well, thank you. Are you well, Doctor?
I'm very well, sir. And firstly, I would like to congratulate you for the information you are imparting to us.
Yes.
And because, it also makes me very proud to it's someone that I know that's speaking, and someone who has risen above the rest. And I'm actually touched by the fact that you pay tribute, firstly, to your father, who was not educated. And it reminds me of my own father, who saw the need for me to be at university. And he's never stepped any further into education. And secondly, you pay tribute to the most people who, in those days, were highly respected, Botichere. And we always, and I hope, as you say, that the teachers of today should try and be sure that each time they wake up, they have a purpose to our nation.
Thanks for that call.
Thank you, Doc.
Yeah, Kutluano on Twitter says, please ask the Deputy Chief Justice what he thinks happened to the PAC after Zef Mutupeng's death and his own departure, and asks, in addition, could the PAC make a return? And perhaps share with us why you were drawn to the PAC, in particular in your youth.
Well, I spent a lot of time in the book to explain it, and I hope many young people will make the time to, and spare a bit of time to go to leave Twitter for a while and go and read up and see that. When I grew up, it was a phenomenal force. It's a historical fact. And it is so that it has been launched, a breakaway from the ANC. It launched a past campaign that changed the face of our struggle entirely. And from there, the PAC was banned, the ANC banned, and indeed the South African Communist Party of South Africa was banned. And that's where actually the liberation movements came from, liberation armies came from. And the formulation of the fact that the duty to liberate sits firmly in the hands of oppressed people, something which, as you know, was re-echoed by Steve Biko even later on, was a very important moment, I think, in reformulating the way the struggle was going to be fought, i.e., you can't outsource your duty to free yourself. That freedom sits and that duty sits firmly with yourself. And you can't pass it on to somebody else to do it. So it was a very vital contribution which was made at the time. Over time, of course, movements are organic and they are as strong as their leaders. When movements lose leaders, they tend to lose their way. And there are many examples in history, indeed. There was quite a serious hemorrhaging of leadership in the PAC at the time.
Would I be fair in saying that the way you write about that in the book is reasonably dispassionate, given what you might have felt at the demise of something that had such a deep emotion and long emotional hold on you? Did you? Is that another book? Is that a conversation for another day? It seemed to me that you dealt with it quite clinically.
Yes, I show you the challenges, that the PAC faced at the time. I show you the difficulties around a leadership. It was less fortunate than other movements, in particular the African National Congress, which had a steady and stable leadership that saw it through, the transition. Despite many years of arrest and exile, even at the end of that, there was still a fairly dependable and steady core of leadership.
Yes.
The same can't be said of the Black Consciousness Movement. The same can't be said of the Pan-Africanist Congress. So some of those movements actually took a hiding. Their main leaders died. Sobukwe died. Steve Biko died. Onkgopotse Tiro died. And Zef Mutuping died. Zef Masemola died. And you can go on. And they actually died prematurely. And that had an impact on their demise going forward, I'm afraid.
Selby wants to join our conversation. He's using this number, 086 0000 959, calling from Orange Farm. Hi, Selby.
Hi, how are you, John?
Yes, well, and you?
I'm blessed beyond measure, John.
Good.
John, I like to thank IFM for bringing us this great man to come and share with us his wisdom. Judge Moseneke.
Dumela ntate, dumela. No, how are you?
I'm blessed beyond measure, ntate. I respect you, my brother. I respect you, ntate. Your teachings that I received when we were still together in one of the political organizations are still keeping me going even now. I'm very much pleased today to listen unto you, my brother. I'll always wish to listen. My challenge is that I can't read the book because of the poor sight I have. If it was an audio, I was going to appreciate it.
Okay, well, thanks, Selby. I mean, maybe there's something there. An audio book, is that planned?
There is an e-book already that is on Kalahari that's available right now on Amazon. And I'm sure Pan Macmillan are planning an e-version, a audio version of the book. That's already an e-version, which I'm sure many young people will try and get access to. Well,
on Twitter, Kutwana responds to your answer to his PAC question and says, "Thank you for asking the PAC question. I'm certainly buying the book tomorrow." Freddie's in Orange Grove. Hi, Freddie.
Yes, good evening, John, and good evening to Mr. Moseneke and to your listeners.
Freddie, dumela hle.
My first statement would be, I would like to make a suggestion, if possibly, maybe if there are some books that you can donate to the public libraries. Why I'm saying that, because you do have some South Africans who won't be able to access that book and they would maybe benefit from that. Some people are not cannot afford such things. And then my second question is, Mr. Moseneke, I'd like to find out, can you really put law and justice in the same sentence? Why I'm saying that is that this, because you find that in South Africa, justice for the African people is elusive, and I don't see the very system that they are practicing, that they are as law, bringing justice to them.
Freddie, with a very, very pertinent and well put question, your thoughts?
Yes. Well, you are right. Ultimately, as you heard me earlier, law is a social phenomenon. It is an instrument to keep society in place and together. And it is a tool to achieve right outcomes in a democratic setting. In other words, properly conceived. But law could also be a tool of repression and oppression. So in a democratic state, the hope is that the people themselves make the laws. Let's just not get confused. Law doesn't float somewhere around. The parliament make laws. We make the constitution. The day we don't like it, we change it. And we change the laws, and we make the laws to serve the people so that justice must come out. So you can talk about law and justice in tandem. I don't mean by that every time the law is applied, justice would result. But we have the facility to refine the law so that it serves us. It makes us to be a better society, and we achieve, for instance, if you're concerned about, for instance, underprivilege amongst African people, it is a genuine, real concern. And you want to contrast it with privilege, which is historic and principally white. It is a legitimate inquiry. But we must use the law, and we make the law, and we rule the country to deliver on the promises of our freedom.
Just so I want to engage with you on something that in your book that I found very, very poignant, and I'll try and make my question as crisp as possible. You describe a number of things that were matters of personal loss. So, for example, while on Robben Island, a very dear aunt, Susan Masikwane, passed away. You're unable to connect with the grief and the family, and obviously not attend the funeral. You talk about your own engagement party. You have to sit in a room because you're facing a banning order. Your younger brother, Tiego, delivers some kind of speech on your behalf. And my question to you is this, not so much necessarily about yourself, but more generally. Given that so much of the hurt delivered to people in the apartheid years was on that very personal level, in addition to all the huge things like denial of rights to education, opportunities to earn money and so on, do you think that some of the difficulties we're facing now is that we've never had a chance to talk about people's personal hurts that in the face of the Boipatong massacre may seem trivial, but in fact, millions of South Africans carry those losses, which in many ways are irredeemable now?
John, you've put your finger on it entirely. I mean, the loss is still there. And quite often people sound like irrational when they talk about white privilege and black pain and about how we've failed to live up to the expectations of 1994 and the promises that we have made to our people. And people look to the state, look to us who are judges, look to others who have public power, and don't find that they get that healing, that restoration. And that is why you hear people say, I live without sewage facilities. I have no access to quality health care. They're really saying the loss has continued.
Yes.
And persists. And if you listen to the students carefully, and you listen to, ultimately this is a huge social call. And the setting of education it's just about one side where you could be able to raise this voice. And so issues of past hurt have not been revisited the right way. In the book, I talk about the death of Dr. Ribeiro and his wife, the death of Griffiths Nklenga and his wife. I talk about attempts to murder me 3 times at least whilst an activist. All of that has not been properly, I think, addressed and socialized. And I think the real remedy is going to lie when society actually changes. So we who have public power, and that has moved me quite a lot at the time when I was in public office, is to do what matters and is good for the people. That is very vital. It will go some way in assuaging, in healing the pain of the past.
What I also found poignant was, as you go through the narrative of your book, from being a small boy who was in Bella Bella and wanted to be a traffic cop to the point you've reached now in your life, is you talk about so many individuals in ways and contexts that are unfamiliar now. So we hear about Reverend Stanley Mogoba, the PAC leader, the great Latin teacher. And we hear about our president, Jacob Zuma, the head of the Robben Island Chess Club, and central defender for Bushbucks FC, on a Robben Island football team. And my question, I guess, to you is this: having known people in those contexts, and I suppose our president comes particularly to mind given what's going on in the country now, what do you make of the fact that history sweeps people into such different spaces where presumably they become different people, but presumably not entirely?
Yes, we've had common experiences. I mean, the president and I went to basically the same, at least, school on Robben Island. I mean, we lived side by side. And I write in the book about how we know each other and how he became a master in chess very, very quickly, and so on. And the roles of different people, whether it's Harry Gwala teaching socialism, or John Pukela, Nyathi Pukela teaching Pan-Africanism, or Tamima Zwai debating some or other issue, and so on. So yes, but the outcomes, I am a little startled that we've ended up in sort of different spaces.
Yes.
Which should not have been so, given the fact that we were really exposed to exactly the same desires to change and liberate our people and remind them that they are their own liberators.
Time for 2 more calls. Mpo's in Kelvin. Hi, Mpo.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Sure.
Ntate Moseneke, Madume, I would like to share a very personal story of how I got to know about Ntate Moseneke. He doesn't know me. But when I was at what they call grade 11 now, at Deepdale High School, our history teacher was Sipho. For the life of me, I can never remember his surname, but he used to literally drill in us the stories, very passionate stories about him and Ntate Moseneke and how he got into prison and the charismatic person that he was. But out of that, I fell in love with the profession of law. I didn't write exams that year. In 1986, I ended up in Lesotho, and I ended up being taught by the best that the continent has to offer. And Lesotho introduced law at high school. That was the best thing they could do for children like ourselves who looked for inspiration that could make us better people. And I would like him to consider introducing programs like those in South Africa, where law or some of these very profound subjects are taught at high school as an introduction so people can appreciate some of the critical building blocks of what makes a society whole and human rights to be upheld. And that's just the story I wanted to share, that I didn't know about you, but I've respected you from that time, and I continue to respect you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mpo.
Thank you, Mpo.
Justice, we've got 1 minute. I don't know how you'd like to use it. Closing arguments is what you would have called it in the past. But a final thought. I mean, people have responded clearly to your book. I'm getting loads of questions. I simply don't have time to engage with them. But a few final thoughts from you on the conversation we've had.
One, I'm excited. We're having a big book launch in Atteridgeville, the village where I come from. And I think all the Sundown supporters will be there together with all the people who come from my township. It will be Saturday at 2 p.m. at the community hall to celebrate the story of that place and the story of our nation and of our people. I truly hope the book will reach many young people, which I dedicate to, and they will learn how, collectively and individually, to be their own liberators and to take on the cudgels until the aims and objectives of our struggle are fulfilled and not betrayed.
I'll give the last word to Kingsley, who says Justice Dikgang Moseneke is the kind of man that makes us aspire to be a better people. He makes me want to sit at his feet with a notepad and just soak up as much as I can from his experiences and vast knowledge. And then he asks about 5 different questions, which we simply don't have time to engage with. But Dikgang Moseneke, many, many thanks for giving us your time tonight on Kai FM.
Thank you, John Perlman. I'm very grateful for the opportunity.